You've been lied to about success. Every motivational poster, every be yourself speech, every piece of advice about authenticity and hard work has sold you a fantasy. Right now, there are people half as talented as you sitting in rooms you'll never enter, making decisions that affect your life, living the existence you thought merit would deliver. And the most disturbing part? They didn't get there by accident. They understood something you weren't taught, something that operates beneath every corporate boardroom, political office, and exclusive network. Today, I'm going to show you the invisible rule book that governs real influence, the one that operates whether you acknowledge it or not. This isn't about becoming manipulative or losing your soul. This is about understanding the game that's already being played around you, so you can finally stop wondering why your talent keeps getting overlooked while others seem to effortlessly rise. What you're about to learn will fundamentally change how you see every interaction, every relationship, and every opportunity for the rest of your life. And fair warning, once you see this, you cannot unsee it. We need to start with an uncomfortable truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The world doesn't operate on the principles we were taught in school. There's no cosmic justice system weighing your good deeds against your failures, no meritocracy patiently waiting to recognize your brilliance. Instead, there exists an invisible architecture of power that flows through every institution, every social circle, every career ladder you'll ever attempt to climb. This architecture has been studied for centuries, most famously by Niccolo Machiavelli in his controversial masterpiece, The Prince. But what Machiavelli understood that most people refuse to accept is that power operates on its own logic, completely separate from morality, fairness, or the narratives we tell ourselves about how things should work. Think about your own experience for a moment. How many times have you watched someone less qualified get the promotion, the funding, the opportunity that you deserved? How often have you felt invisible in rooms where mediocre people commanded attention simply through their presence? This isn't bad luck. This isn't even injustice in the traditional sense. It's the natural consequence of not understanding that power responds to specific signals, specific patterns of behavior that have nothing to do with your resume or your character. The people who rise aren't necessarily better than you. They're simply fluent in a language you were never taught. The brutal reality is that we live in a world divided into players and pieces. The pieces believe that doing good work, being authentic, and waiting patiently will eventually be rewarded. The players understand that power is a game with rules, and those rules are learnable. Most frustratingly, these rules often contradict everything your teachers, parents, and mentors told you about success. They told you to stand out and showcase your talents. The real rule: never outshine those above you. They told you to be honest and straightforward about your goals. The real rule: conceal your intentions until the moment is right. They told you to be kind and help others. The real rule: appeal to self-interest, because mercy is a burden to the powerful. This disconnect between what we're taught and what actually works creates a permanent class of talented, well-meaning people who spend their lives confused about why their efforts never translate into influence. They watch others play the game successfully and dismiss them as lucky, unethical, or somehow less deserving. But this dismissal is itself a defense mechanism, a way of protecting their worldview from a truth too disturbing to integrate. The truth is that power doesn't care about your intentions. It only cares about your leverage. Let's examine the first major mistake that talented people make, the error that probably costs more careers than any other single factor. When you finally get access to someone powerful, someone who could change your trajectory, your instinct is to demonstrate your value by showing how smart, capable, and talented you are. This feels logical. After all, how else will they recognize your potential?
But this instinct is precisely what ensures you'll remain invisible to them forever. Here's what's actually happening in that moment. Powerful people, almost without exception, have constructed their identity around being the most capable person in the room. This isn't vanity in the simple sense. It's a psychological necessity born from years of fighting their way to the top, where every moment of self-doubt could have meant defeat. Their sense of self is intimately tied to being the one with the best ideas, the sharpest insights, the most commanding presence. When you walk into their orbit and immediately start showcasing your brilliance, you're not impressing them, you're threatening them. The response to this threat is almost always subconscious, but devastatingly effective. They will find reasons to dismiss you, minimize your contributions, or simply ensure you don't get future opportunities to make them feel inadequate. You might have been trying to demonstrate that you'd be a valuable addition to their team, but what they heard was that you might eventually replace them or expose their own limitations. This is the visibility paradox. The more you try to shine, the more invisible you become because you've categorized yourself as a threat rather than an asset. The counterintuitive solution is to deliberately dim your light in their presence. This doesn't mean hiding your competence or playing stupid. It means framing your ideas in a way that allows them to claim ownership, asking questions that let them showcase their expertise, and structuring conversations so they feel like the smartest person in the exchange. When you present a solution to a problem, you don't say, "Here's what we should do," as if you figured out something they missed. Instead, you say, "I was thinking about what you mentioned last week about X, and I realized you were absolutely right that Y would be the logical next step." This approach accomplishes multiple objectives simultaneously. First, it eliminates the threat response, allowing them to relax and actually hear what you're saying. Second, it creates a subtle psychological debt because you've made them feel good about themselves, and humans are hardwired to want to reciprocate positive feelings. And third, and most importantly, it positions you as someone who enhances their success rather than competing with it. Over time, as you consistently make them look brilliant, they begin to associate your presence with feeling competent and validated. This association is the foundation of real influence, far more powerful than any impressive credential or achievement you could wave in their face.
The second critical error that keeps people trapped outside circles of influence is what I call aggressive transparency. Most people, when they finally get access to someone powerful, immediately reveal their agenda. Their eyes, their body language, their choice of topics all scream the same message: "I need something from you." This desperation, even when it's completely rational given their circumstances, creates an immediate repulsion in the person they're trying to connect with. Understanding why this happens requires understanding the daily experience of powerful people. From the moment they wake up, they're bombarded with requests, pitches, and asks disguised as conversations. Every coffee meeting, every dinner invitation, every friendly email contains an ulterior motive. Over time, this creates a psychological defense mechanism where they become extremely sensitive to detecting need. The moment they sense you want something, a wall goes up, and you've been categorized as just another person trying to extract value from them. The solution is to become what intelligence agencies call a cipher, someone whose true intentions cannot be easily read. When you interact with powerful people, you must train yourself to talk about anything except the thing you actually want. Discuss art, philosophy, books, unusual interests, interesting observations about the world. Create conversations that exist purely for their own sake, with no apparent agenda. This accomplishes something remarkable. In a world where everyone wants something, you become the person who wants nothing. This is so unusual, so refreshing to their experience that it creates genuine curiosity. Human psychology contains a powerful quirk that you can leverage here.
When people encounter something they cannot immediately categorize or understand, their brain treats it as an incomplete puzzle that demands solving. This is called the Zeigarnik effect, and it's why cliffhangers work in television shows. By being mysterious about your intentions, you create an open loop in their mind. They start thinking about you between your interactions, trying to figure out what you want, who you really are. In essence, they begin to chase you to solve the puzzle you've created, completely reversing the normal power dynamic. But here's the sophisticated part that most people miss. This mystery cannot be artificial or performative. If you're actively trying to seem mysterious, it will come across as manipulation, which is even worse than obvious need. The real solution is to develop a genuine life rich enough that you have interesting things to discuss that have nothing to do with your professional ambitions. This means reading widely, developing unusual interests, having opinions about culture and philosophy and art. When your mystery is authentic, rooted in actual depth of character, it becomes magnetic in a way that can never be faked. Now we arrive at one of the most difficult truths for good-hearted people to accept. Appealing to someone's better nature, asking them to help you out of kindness or fairness, is one of the least effective strategies for gaining influence. This isn't because powerful people are necessarily cruel or heartless, though some certainly are. It's because mercy and gratitude are luxuries that busy, successful people cannot afford to prioritize. Think about it from their perspective. Every day they receive countless requests for help, mentorship, opportunities, and favors. If they said yes to everyone who had a good reason to deserve assistance, they would have no time or resources left for their own priorities. So they develop an immune system against emotional appeals. When you explain how hard you've worked, how much you deserve a break, how fair it would be for them to give you a chance, they might feel momentary sympathy, but it won't translate into action. Sympathy is a feeling. Action requires motivation. And the only motivation powerful enough to drive action is self-interest. This is where most people's conditioning actively sabotages them. We've been taught that transactional relationships are somehow less noble than relationships based on mutual respect and goodwill. We've internalized the idea that approaching connections as exchanges is cynical or mercenary. But this moral framework, while admirable in personal friendships, is completely misaligned with how professional power operates. The most successful relationships at high levels are explicitly transactional, built on clear mutual benefit rather than vague feelings of obligation. The art here is positioning yourself not as someone asking for a favor, but as someone offering a transaction disguised as an alliance. Before you ever approach a powerful person, you need to do deep research into their specific situation. What problems keep them up at night? What rivals threaten their position? What tedious tasks consume their time that they wish someone else would handle? What information do they lack that you could provide? Your value proposition must be so specifically tailored to their current pain points that it becomes irrational for them to refuse. For example, instead of saying, "I'd love to work with you because I admire your company," you might say, "I noticed your recent expansion into the Asian market, and I spent 3 years analyzing distribution networks in that region for my previous role. I've identified what I think is a critical blind spot in your current approach that could cost you millions, and I'd be happy to walk you through it." Notice the difference. The first approach asks them to care about your career aspirations. The second makes you immediately useful to their existing priorities. You're not requesting anything. You're offering something they already need. This principle extends beyond initial connections into how you maintain and deepen relationships with powerful people. At every stage, you should be asking yourself, what can I provide that makes me indispensable to their success? The goal is never to be liked or admired, though those may emerge as byproducts. The goal is to be needed, because people can stop liking you for 1,000 arbitrary reasons, but they cannot stop needing someone who is critical to their success. In our hyper-connected world, where everyone is perpetually available through multiple communication channels, we've created a paradox of worthlessness. When you can reach anyone at any time, when responses come within minutes, when availability is constant, we unconsciously devalue these connections. This is basic economics applied to human relationships. Scarcity creates value. Abundance creates disposability. And yet, most people trying to connect with powerful individuals make themselves abundantly, eagerly available, never understanding why this accessibility makes them seem cheap rather than eager. Machiavelli understood this principle 500 years ago when he advised princes not to be seen too often by their subjects. The more visible a leader became, the more ordinary they appeared. Mystery and occasional absence were essential to maintaining the aura of power. This same principle applies to you in your relationships with influential people. If you respond to every message immediately, if you're always free when they want to meet, if you drop everything the moment they express interest, you're teaching them that your time has no competing demands, which means your time has no value. The solution requires learning the art of strategic absence. When you do interact with powerful people, you must be fully present, engaged, offering genuine value and insight. But then you must disappear. Not in a way that seems rude or deliberately withholding, but in a way that suggests you have a full, demanding life that occasionally takes you away from accessibility. This creates what psychologists call the Zygarnik effect, operating in a different dimension. Your absence becomes an open loop in their mind, an incomplete pattern that their brain seeks to complete. What's fascinating about this dynamic is how it transforms the emotional tenor of your relationship. When you're always available, interactions with you become an obligation, something they can do whenever they have spare time or need something. But when you're periodically unavailable, your presence becomes a reward, something they have to plan around and value when it occurs. This subtle shift in framing changes everything about how they perceive and prioritize you. However, this strategy contains a dangerous trap that you must avoid. The absence cannot be arbitrary or manipulative. If you're obviously playing games, making yourself artificially scarce just to create the appearance of being in demand, sophisticated people will see through it immediately, and you'll lose all credibility. The scarcity must be genuine, rooted in actual commitments and priorities that command your attention. This means you need to build a life rich enough that you're not dependent on any single relationship, no matter how powerful the person. You need projects, commitments, relationships, and pursuits that genuinely demand your time and create legitimate reasons for periodic unavailability. Now we enter territory that may seem almost mystical, but it's actually rooted in hard neuroscience. Every human being, especially successful and powerful ones, is secretly obsessed with their own worldview. They believe their way of seeing things is not just one perspective among many, but somehow closer to objective truth. This isn't arrogance in the conventional sense. It's a necessary psychological structure that allows them to make decisions with confidence in the face of uncertainty. But this self-referential orientation creates an opportunity for those who understand how to exploit it. The technique is called mirroring, and while it sounds simple, executing it with the sophistication necessary to influence powerful people requires tremendous discipline and observation. At the most basic level, mirroring involves adopting someone's posture, speech patterns, vocabulary, and even breathing rhythm. When done subtly, this creates neurological synchronization. Their brain begins to recognize patterns that match its own internal rhythms, which triggers the sensation that you understand them on a deep level. This bypasses their analytical mind and speaks directly to older, more primitive parts of the brain that govern trust and affiliation. But simple physical mirroring is just the entry point. The real power comes from mirroring their conceptual frameworks, their ways of making sense of the world. This requires careful listening over time to understand not just what they think, but how they think. Do they make decisions primarily through analytical frameworks or intuitive leaps? Do they value tradition and precedent or innovation and disruption? Do they see the world through power dynamics or collaborative opportunities? Once you understand their fundamental operating system, you can frame your communications in ways that feel native to their thought process. For example, if you're dealing with someone who fundamentally sees business as warfare, using collaborative language will create friction, even if your ideas are good. Instead, you frame things in terms of strategic advantages, competitive positioning, capturing territory. Your ideas don't change, but the language you use to present them aligns perfectly with how their brain naturally processes information. This alignment feels effortless to them, which they interpret as you being particularly insightful or intelligent, when really you're just speaking their native language. The deepest level of mirroring goes beyond mechanics to something almost therapeutic. When powerful people look at you, they should see reflected back the idealized version of themselves, not who they are, but who they believe they are or wish to become. If they see themselves as a visionary, you must be the person who recognizes and validates that vision. If they see themselves as a pragmatic operator, you must appreciate and reinforce that identity. By becoming a mirror that shows them their best self, you make your presence addictive because humans are drawn to people who make them feel understood and valued in their core identity.
In the modern landscape of power, information has replaced many traditional forms of capital as the ultimate currency. This isn't just about knowing things, although knowledge certainly matters. It's about controlling the flow of valuable information in a way that makes you indispensable to those who need it. Powerful people face a peculiar paradox. The more successful they become, the more insulated they get from ground truth. They become surrounded by subordinates who tell them what they want to hear, by yes-men who fear contradicting them, by filtered communications that remove uncomfortable details. This creates an information vacuum that you can fill if you're strategic about it. The key is positioning yourself as a source of unfiltered intelligence that they cannot get anywhere else. This might mean having connections in industries or networks they don't personally access. It might mean being willing to deliver hard truths that others sugarcoat. It might mean synthesizing patterns from disparate sources in ways that reveal opportunities or threats they haven't noticed. Whatever form it takes, your information must be both valuable and unique. But here's the critical principle that separates amateurs from masters of this technique. You must never reveal all your sources or methods. If they fully understand how you acquire your information, they can potentially replicate your process and eliminate their dependence on you. You need to maintain what intelligence agencies call compartmentalization. Give them the intelligence they need, but keep the methodology opaque. This maintains your monopoly on that particular information supply, ensuring they must continue coming to you rather than going around you. The sophistication comes in calibrating what information to share and when. You cannot simply dump everything you know in an attempt to demonstrate value. Information shared prematurely loses impact. Information held too long becomes stale and worthless. You need to develop a sense of timing, an intuition for the exact moment when a particular piece of intelligence becomes most valuable to their current situation. This transforms you from someone who knows things into someone who knows things at exactly the right time, which is exponentially more valuable. There's also an ethical dimension here that we should address directly. Being an information broker doesn't mean trafficking in gossip, spreading rumors, or betraying confidences in destructive ways. The most valuable information isn't usually scandalous, it's strategic. Market trends they haven't noticed, emerging competitors they should know about, internal dynamics in their organization that aren't making it to their level, regulatory changes that will impact their business. Your role is to make them smarter and better informed, not to turn you into a gossip or a spy engaged in corporate espionage.
There's a counterintuitive truth about human bonding that most people never learn. Shared loves create acquaintances. Shared enemies create brothers. Nothing forges deep loyalty faster than the feeling of being in a foxhole together against a common threat. This principle operates at every level of human organization, from street gangs to corporate boardrooms to international alliances. And it provides one of the most reliable shortcuts to connecting with powerful people, if you're willing to use it strategically. The first step is intelligence gathering. Before you can align against someone's enemy, you need to identify who or what that enemy actually is. Sometimes it's obvious. They have a clear business rival, a political opponent, a competitor for resources. But often the enemy is more conceptual. They might be fighting against outdated industry practices, against a particular ideology, against bureaucratic thinking, against the status quo itself. Your job is to figure out what they're really fighting against, not just in their public statements, but in their private frustrations. Once you've identified their enemy, your move is alignment and validation. You cannot simply say, "I also dislike that person." That's too shallow and obvious. Instead, you need to demonstrate that you understand why they view this person or concept as an enemy, that you've independently arrived at similar conclusions through your own analysis. You want them to feel that you're not just agreeing with them to curry favor, but that you're a fellow traveler who's reached the same destination through parallel reasoning. The power of this dynamic lies in how it recategorizes your relationship. Before, you were an outsider seeking access. Now, you're an ally in their struggle. This shift is profound because it changes the fundamental nature of trust. They're no longer evaluating whether you might be useful to them. They're experiencing you as someone who shares their fight, which creates a bond that transcends transactional calculation. You become part of their us in the us versus them framework that shapes how they see the world. However, this technique carries significant risks if mishandled. You cannot fabricate hatred for something you don't actually oppose, because your lack of authentic commitment will eventually become apparent. You also cannot become more extreme in your opposition than they are, because that makes you seem performative or fanatical. The alignment must be genuine and calibrated. You're amplifying an existing resonance, not creating a false one. The goal is to be the person who truly gets why they're fighting what they're fighting, who validates the importance and rightness of their struggle in ways that other people don't. Here's a truth that will make you uncomfortable. Almost no one, including powerful people, lives primarily in reality. We live in narratives about ourselves, stories we tell that explain who we are and why we matter. These narratives are often elaborate fantasies that paper over uncomfortable truths about our limitations, our luck, our compromises, and the people who become most influential are those who can identify these fantasies and play supporting roles in them so convincingly that they become indispensable to the fantasy's maintenance. Every powerful person has an idealized self-concept, a vision of who they believe they are at their core. Some see themselves as wise mentors who elevate others. Some see themselves as visionary disruptors who challenge convention. Some see themselves as pragmatic builders who create lasting institutions. Some see themselves as misunderstood geniuses who operate on a level others cannot comprehend. Your job is forensic psychology. Through careful observation and conversation, you need to diagnose which fantasy they're living in. Once you've identified their fantasy, you must become the one person who consistently affirms and participates in it. If they see themselves as a mentor, you must be the grateful student who implements their wisdom and reports back on its effectiveness. If they see themselves as a visionary, you must be the believer who can articulate their vision even clearer than they can. If they see themselves as a builder, you must be the engineer who can translate their grand plans into concrete reality. The role you play must be so perfectly aligned with their self-concept that your presence reinforces their identity. This creates a dependency that goes far beyond practical utility. You become psychologically necessary to their sense of self. If you were to suddenly disappear or contradict the fantasy, their entire self-concept would be threatened. This makes them fiercely protective of you, not because of what you do for them in practical terms, but because you're essential to the story they tell themselves about who they are. You've woven yourself into their identity in a way that makes you almost impossible to remove without causing them psychological distress. The ethical question here is obvious and important. Are you manipulating them by participating in their fantasy? The answer depends entirely on whether the fantasy is fundamentally destructive or relatively benign. If their fantasy causes harm to others or prevents them from seeing truths they need to see, then yes, reinforcing it is manipulation of the harmful variety. But if their fantasy is simply the normal human need to see themselves as significant and effective, and your participation helps them feel understood while you pursue your legitimate goals, then you're engaged in the kind of mutual construction of meaning that underlies all human relationships.
Powerful people live in a perpetual storm of anxiety and pressure. Every decision they make affects multiple people and potentially millions of dollars. Every day brings new crises that demand immediate attention. Every hour contains more demands than they can possibly meet. Most people, when they enter this environment, add to the chaos. They bring problems without solutions. They create drama where calm is needed. They amplify stress rather than reducing it. This makes them exhausting to be around, people to be avoided rather than sought out. The opportunity here is to become something extremely rare and therefore extremely valuable, the calm center in their storm. This requires developing what I call emotional alchemy, the ability to absorb their anxiety and transmute it into steadiness. When they come to you frantic about a crisis, you must project unshakable calm, not dismissive indifference, which would make them feel unheard, but confident tranquility that suggests you've seen this situation before and know exactly how it resolves. The most powerful words you can learn to say, delivered with absolute conviction, are, "It's handled." These two words accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously. First, they remove a burden from their mental load, allowing their stress to decrease. Second, they demonstrate competence and reliability, showing that you can execute without needing their constant oversight. Third, they position you as someone who solves problems rather than creates them, which is a rare and precious quality in any organization or relationship. But becoming the calm center requires more than just surface-level composure. It requires actually developing the internal resources to remain genuinely calm under pressure. This means doing serious work on your own anxiety, your own triggers, your own tendency to catastrophize or panic. It means cultivating what Stoic philosophers called equanimity, the ability to maintain your center regardless of external circumstances. If your calm is performative rather than genuine, it will crack under sufficient pressure, and you'll lose all credibility. There's a neuroscience dimension to this worth understanding. When someone is in a state of high stress, their amygdala is hijacking their prefrontal cortex, making rational decision-making difficult. If you can lower their cortisol levels through your calm presence, you literally help their brain return to optimal functioning. This creates a biological response where they begin to associate your presence with feeling better, more capable, more in control. Over time, this association becomes powerful enough that they actively seek you out when facing difficulties, because you've become a kind of emotional regulator for their nervous system. Rigid people break under pressure. They have fixed ideas about who they are, how they should behave, what their style must be. This rigidity makes them easy to predict, easy to manipulate,
and easy to exclude from situations where they don't naturally fit. The most successful operators at high levels are what I call shapeshifters, people who maintain core values but adapt their expression to whatever environment they enter. This formlessness is simultaneously a defense mechanism and an offensive strategy. Think of water. Water has no fixed shape, yet it's one of the most powerful forces on Earth. It flows into any container, adapts to any obstacle, yet maintains its essential nature. This is the quality you must cultivate in relation to power. If the environment is formal, you become formal. If the culture is casual, you become casual. If they're whiskey, you drink whiskey. If they're vegan, you discover your interest in plant-based nutrition. This isn't hypocrisy. It's recognizing that most of what we think of as our fixed personality is actually just habitual behavior that serves no essential purpose. The key is distinguishing between your core values, which should remain stable, and your surface presentation, which should be endlessly adaptable. Your core values are things like integrity, competence, loyalty to your own goals. Your surface presentation is everything else: how you dress, how you speak, what cultural references you make, how formal or informal you are. Most people confuse these categories, treating surface presentation as if it were core identity, which limits their ability to fit into diverse environments. Formlessness also functions as a defense mechanism. If you have no fixed shape, you cannot be hit. People cannot figure out how to attack you because you refuse to present a stable target. You're liberal when that serves you, and conservative when that serves you. You're aggressive when that's needed, and deferential when that's needed. This doesn't mean you have no principles. It means your principles operate at a level beneath surface presentation, making you immune to superficial categorization. The most sophisticated application of this principle is recognizing that powerful people themselves are often shapeshifters, and they're looking for others who can operate at that level. They don't want people around them who are rigidly themselves, because rigidity limits strategic options. They want people who can fit into any keyhole, who can represent them in any context, who can navigate any social or professional environment without creating friction. By demonstrating formlessness, you're signaling that you're capable of operating at their level, that you understand the game they're playing.
We now arrive at the ultimate objective that all previous principles build toward: making yourself necessary to someone's success in a way that makes you functionally irreplaceable. Most people think job security comes from being good at what they do, but competence is table stakes. There are always other competent people who could potentially do your job. True security, true power, comes from weaving yourself so deeply into someone's operation that they literally cannot function without you. This requires identifying and mastering aspects of their world that meet specific criteria. First, the task or knowledge must be genuinely critical to their success. Second, it must be something they either hate doing or don't have time to do themselves. Third, it must be complex enough that it can't be easily transferred to someone else or automated. Fourth, and most important, you must become the sole repository of that knowledge or capability, so that replacing you would require significant time and risk. The classic example is becoming the person who understands a critical but Byzantine system that the organization depends on. Maybe it's the relationship network with key clients that exists primarily in your head. Maybe it's a proprietary process you've developed that works, but that you've never fully documented. Maybe it's institutional knowledge about how things really work versus how they're supposed to work. Whatever form it takes, you want to reach a state where they think, we literally cannot afford to lose this person because the disruption would be catastrophic. This might sound mercenary or even slightly threatening, like you're holding them hostage with your indispensability. But consider the alternative. If you're easily replaceable, you have no leverage, no security, no ability to negotiate for the conditions you want. You exist at their pleasure,
one bad quarter or leadership change away from irrelevance. By making yourself necessary, you're creating a relationship of mutual dependence where both parties benefit from maintaining the connection. They get capabilities they cannot easily replicate. You get security and influence that comes from being essential. The sophistication lies in how you create this entanglement. You cannot be obvious about it. You cannot hoard information in ways that seem deliberately obstructive or make people feel like you're trying to make yourself irreplaceable. Instead, you genuinely become more and more capable, taking on responsibilities and developing expertise that naturally makes you central to operations. The entanglement emerges organically from your expanding competence and responsibilities, not from artificial gatekeeping. There's a final dimension to this that separates amateurs from masters. Once you've made yourself necessary to one powerful person, you need to use that position to create redundant connections to other powerful people. You never want your fate tied to a single individual, no matter how successful they currently are. Circumstances change, people fall from power, organizations restructure. Your goal is to be the organ that connects multiple parts of the body, so that your removal would affect multiple power centers simultaneously. At that point, you've transcended being an employee or even an ally. You've become infrastructure. The autonomy paradox. We arrive at the final and perhaps most counterintuitive principle. To truly connect with powerful people, you must genuinely not need them. This sounds paradoxical. Why would you go through all this effort to connect with powerful people if you don't need what they can offer? But this paradox contains the entire key to the puzzle. The moment you need someone's approval, recognition, or assistance, they can smell it. And that hunger, that dependence, that neediness makes you repulsive to them because it places demands on them that they resent. Powerful people are surrounded by people who need things from them. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every relationship contains an unspoken ask. Every smile hides a request. This creates a profound exhaustion and cynicism, where they begin to assume everyone wants something. In this environment, someone who genuinely needs nothing becomes magnetic precisely because of their rarity. They're like a cold drink in a desert. Their presence is refreshing because it demands nothing. But how do you cultivate genuine non-neediness? The only way is to build your own kingdom, your own base of security and accomplishment that means your well-being doesn't depend on any single person or opportunity. This might mean developing multiple income streams so you're not financially dependent. It might mean building your own network and reputation so you're not dependent on anyone's approval. It might mean having clear values and self-worth that doesn't require external validation. Whatever form it takes, you must be genuinely willing to walk away from any relationship, no matter how promising, if it doesn't serve you. This creates an energy shift that changes everything about how you're perceived. Instead of fluid, bendable, obviously seeking approval, you become solid. You state your positions clearly. You maintain boundaries. You decline opportunities that don't align with your interests. Paradoxically, this makes you more attractive to powerful people, not less. They're so used to people contorting themselves to please them that someone who won't do that registers as either a threat or an equal, both of which are more interesting than a supplicant. The truly sophisticated understand that this autonomy isn't about arrogance or playing hard to get. It's about genuine self-sufficiency that creates a relationship of equals rather than a relationship of dependence. When you don't need them, they can relax around you. They don't have to wonder what you want or when you're going to make your ask. They can engage with you as a person rather than another demand on their limited resources. And ironically, this is often when they start offering things to you, because humans want to give to people who don't need it and withhold from people who do.
These laws might seem cold or calculating, especially if your worldview has been shaped by ideals of authenticity and just being yourself. But consider what being yourself really means. For most people, it means defaulting to habitual patterns that feel comfortable but produce no results. It means operating on autopilot according to social conditioning that was never designed to give you power or influence. It means playing a game without acknowledging the rules, then wondering why you keep losing. The truth these laws reflect is simply how power actually operates in human systems. You can choose to find this reality distasteful and remain outside looking in, frustrated by your invisibility. Or you can acknowledge reality and learn to work with it rather than against it. This doesn't mean abandoning your values or becoming someone you despise. It means recognizing that the game is being played whether you participate consciously or not, and that conscious participation gives you agency rather than victimhood. These principles require daily practice to internalize. You cannot read them once and expect mastery. Instead, you must begin observing every interaction through this lens. Watch how power actually flows in your environment. Notice who has influence and how they got it. Pay attention to your own behaviors and what results they produce. Over time, these laws stop being external rules and become intuitions, natural responses that emerge without conscious thought. The goal is not manipulation for its own sake. The goal is effectiveness in pursuing your legitimate objectives. If your aims are constructive, if you want to build something valuable or achieve something meaningful, then these laws are tools that help you gather the resources and support necessary to realize your vision. They help you stop being a spectator and become a player in the systems that shape outcomes in our world. They transform you from someone things happen to into someone who makes things happen. And in that transformation lies the difference between spending your life wondering why you were overlooked and spending it building the reality you want to inhabit.